everyone for joining us for, I think, something like the 26th edition of Planetarium Online. I'm Mike, the Planetarium Director, and our program today is called October Skies, taking advantage of the fact that we're going to have a really great set of things to watch here in October. 4 planets are in the sky, great constellations, and not 1 but 2 moons are in the sky as well. So joining me in the chat is Andrew, and so if you have questions about astronomy, go ahead and put those in the chat, and he can answer those as you're, I'm sure, quite well aware. He's extremely knowledgeable about astronomy. And we'll also leave some time at the end of the show, which will last about half an hour, to answer questions as well. We have reopened our main dome, the Jennifer Chalsty Planetarium, the largest planetarium in America, opened with Liberty Science Center on Labor Day weekend a few weeks ago. We are currently open Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and have planetarium shows every hour. This coming Monday, the 4th, and also next Monday, we are also open for the Sukkot holiday this coming Monday and for Columbus Day the Monday afterwards. And we're using the same software in the big dome that we're using here for this show, and the same 3 people who do these shows online. So me and Andrew and Krista are in there doing the shows as well at the main site, giving programming. So last of all, before we get going, this is a totally free program. There's no cost to join. But if you wanted to donate to support our efforts to keep this free programming going, there is a little donate button, LSC donate button, a purple button. That's the only true way to donate to us. And if you click that, it's a safe link and will allow you to support our continued desire to keep programming going here online. All right, so with that said, we're now going to go ahead and go begin our show where all astronomy has its origins, of course, going out to this sky you'd see this very evening. So here's the sky tonight at 5:12 in the afternoon. And again, for once, the nice blue sky looks exactly like the sky really looks. It's a beautiful day out there here, classic fall day in the Northeast. And we're going to be heading out, first of all, and checking out the stars that you'd see over in the western sky. So if you go out tonight and watch the sun go down, by 7:45 it's going to be good and dark. So let's head out to the evening sky. The chance to say farewell to some of the classic stars and constellations of the summer. So here at 7:45, the brightest star you can see over there is called Arcturus. Now Arcturus is only the 4th brightest star, but Sirius, the dog star, the brightest star, doesn't rise till much later. And as luck would have it, the 2nd and 3rd brightest stars, Canopus and Alpha Centauri, we never see them in New Jersey. They never rise above our horizon. So Arcturus is it in terms of the brightest star in the sky, although it's rivaled both in its reddish hue and in brightness by this star here, the star Antares, whose name means Mars's rival. The star has a similar reddish color to Mars, and normally Mars is about as bright as this star, although as we'll see later, Mars is way brighter now than it normally is, and way brighter than Antares. Antares is the bright star in the Scorpion. Here is the claw of the Scorpion, the red heart, and the stinger, just touching the horizon here at 7:45 on this first day of October. So of the constellations, the classic constellations of the summer, the first one to take the plunge behind the sun is going to be the Scorpion, and by the end of the month, we'll have lost the Scorpion. So it's a chance to say farewell to that classic constellation of summertime. Now, bright as Antares and Arcturus are, the brightest dot of light you're going to see looking west tonight is the planet Jupiter. So minus 2.5 magnitude, when a thing has a minus magnitude, it just means it's really, really, really bright. And in fact, Jupiter is brighter than any star by 3 times. And in even a small telescope, you can get a really good view of the 4 big moons of Jupiter. They're called the Galilean moons because Galileo discovered them in 1610 with his newfangled telescope. And these moons actually go around so fast, they change their position every night. I wanted to mention, if you want to get a telescope, we can give you some suggestions in the chat for a good first telescope. It'd be a great time to get one. So Jupiter is bright because it's really big and because its clouds are really bright. So here is Earth in comparison to the king of the planets, And in fact, it would take about 11 of our planet Earths to stretch across the inside of Jupiter from one side to another. So about 11 Earths in diameter, or another way to think about that is that about 1,300 planet Earths would fit inside of Jupiter. It's often called a failed star. If it was much larger, Jupiter would have enough pressure to begin fusion in its core, and we'd have a two-star system and not just a one-star system. So the cloud tops contain many striking storms, and right now orbiting the planet Jupiter, we have a mission called Juno. That's Juno, the wife of Jupiter in Roman myth. And Juno has this odd orbit where it gets within 3,000 miles of the great planet every 53 days, then goes way out millions of miles, and then comes in again for another close encounter. These close encounters are called perijoves. It just means close to Jupiter. And the next one's going to be on November 8. Every time there's a perijove, we get great new content and images from Jupiter. The Juno mission is going to be around for another 10 months or so. So that is Jupiter blazing away, and its companion for this year is the planet Saturn, the second biggest planet, and a sight in a telescope that's even more awesome than Jupiter is, with these beautiful rings. Now, Saturn's 1 billion miles away. That's twice as far as the planet Jupiter, and it's not quite as big, but it is the second biggest planet. So we're going to impose the Earth next to Saturn now, and you can see that it is a really big planet as well. In fact, not only is the planet big, but the rings are enormous. So it would take about 5 planet Earths to fit across the rings of Saturn. So as we enter the realm of the gas giants, the scale of the planets is so much more enormous than our little rocky worlds like planet Earth. Now, we don't think of Saturn having the really striking atmosphere that Jupiter does, but it does have really fascinating storm patterns. So here's a storm that's at the North Pole, about the size of Earth, and it's taking the form of a hexagon, a six-sided figure. Astronomers are still trying to figure out what conditions make this hexagonal shape. Although in a laboratory on Earth with the right fluids, you can also get fluids to behave that way. So they're still working on what really makes that shape to that storm. The rings do appear to be solid from far away, even from pretty close up, but as we dive into them, you can see they're made of little bits of rock and ice, mainly ice, small as a pebble and as big as a school bus, and they're orbiting like zillions of little tiny moonlets going around the planet. There are some actual moons in the rings as well, so here's a moon coming up called Pan, P-A-N. It's also where we get the word panic, the god of craziness, apparently. And it's kind of clearing out a space for itself in the rings. The rings won't be around forever, which is weird to think. They were formed by a moon getting too close to Saturn and being destroyed many, many millions of years ago. And someday, millions of years down the line, there'll be no rings of Saturn, which is really weird to think of Saturn without its most famous feature. So you better get out there and enjoy the view while we can. We may have only 100 million years left of rings of Saturn. So here again is what you'd be seeing over there in the sky in the west at 7:45 tonight with Jupiter, Saturn, and again we have the Scorpion still there, still just about to touch the horizon. And by the way, next to the Scorpion, here we have the teapot of Sagittarius. Imagine here's the handle, a pointed lid, a spout. And Sagittarius is good to note because we're going to go forward to the end of October in just a moment and use that as a reference to see what stays and what has gone away as you go from the first day of October to the last. Because here's the deal. So stars set 4 minutes earlier every day. It's not the stars doing the work. It's as we go around the sun slowly moves in front of the stars and blocks off those stars. And what we see from our perspective is that the stars appear to set 4 minutes earlier. So some of these stars low in the sky are going to be gone by the end of October. So let's go ahead and do that. We're now going to go from October 1 to October 31, Saturday night, Halloween night, and look at how the sky changes as we go looking at the western sky on the last day of the month. So as we go to October 31, look, the Scorpion's gone. It's behind the sun. We can't see it anymore, although we do still have the teapot there. So the teapot's hanging on, although its time is coming. It'll be gone by the end of November. We also have Jupiter and Saturn hanging on for dear life. And here's the deal. While the parade of the stars is the same every year, you lose the stars at the same time every year, they come back at the same time every year, the planets wander against the starry background, and both Jupiter and Saturn are slowly wandering in this direction, and that means they're going to avoid the fate of plunging into the sun's light until the end of 2020. So we're going to have Jupiter and Saturn with us all the way until the end of this calendar year. New Year's Eve 2020 into 2021 is going to be our farewell to these planets. And they're going to draw closer together. So they'll be in a very nice gathering, Jupiter and Saturn, as a way to say farewell to this wackiest of all years, 2020. So that's sky over in the west here. Let's get back to tonight's sky, the sky again that you should be able to see very well tonight if this beautiful weather continues as it's supposed to here in the Northeast. So we're now going to turn over towards the northern sky. And coming around, try to pick out the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper, the stars aren't bright, but that pattern is just so distinctive that folks have an easy time finding it, which is great because the Big Dipper is also a handy-dandy way to locate the North Star. The North Star is not that bright, and so to have a guide like the Big Dipper is very handy. The North Star, by the way, is in the Little Dipper, is the brightest star in the Little Dipper, but that's not saying much. It's not a very bright constellation. So it's nice to have a guide like the Big Dipper to show your way to it. The official names for these two constellations are the Big Bear and the Little Bear. And actually, astronomers have an official list of 88 constellations that they use as a roadmap so they can all tell each other where things are in the sky using an agreed-upon official 88 constellation list. Another one of those 88 is Cassiopeia, the heavenly W. Like the Big Dipper, it's not bright, but the shape is so distinctive, it does pop out. We'll hear more about Cassiopeia the Queen momentarily. Now we're going to go through the night and go from 7:45 to 2 in the morning tonight. As the world turns, notice the North Star stays in place. And as we get later on this October evening, the Big Dipper gets low and Cassiopeia gets very high. The Big Dipper never sets from here in New Jersey, but it's so low that especially in our urban environment, it's often behind trees and buildings here when it's at its lowest point. So as a handy-dandy tip, if you can't find the Big Dipper, you can also use Cassiopeia to find the North Star. Right now it looks like an M in the sky. If you take the three middle stars here, they make an arrow that just kind of roughly points to where the North Star is. And you only have to get close because there's no bright star besides the North Star in that part of the sky. That was especially handy when I lived in a more southern latitude. In Hawaii, the Big Dipper is gone for part of the night, and so we really had to rely upon Cassiopeia, which is known as the frigate bird in Hawaii, to find our way to the North Star. So why does the North Star stay in place while all the other stars spin around? Well, the North Star is over the North Pole, the axis of our rotation. So as the world turns, because it's over the point where we spin, the North Star stays right there in place, and all the other stars appear to pinwheel around it. So as long as it's dark and clear, and as long as you're north of the equator, you can always find the North Star. Now we're going around to the eastern sky. That's the direction where things do rise. I'm doing a quick check in the chat to see if there's any immediate things to attend to. Of course, we have Andrew in there, and he's been able to catch pretty much all the questions coming in. So looking over towards the eastern sky, we'll get to that bright moon and that bright Mars momentarily. But also there are 6 classic constellations of the fall that had their Hollywood moment not once but twice when movies were made about these characters in 1981 and 2010. And it begins with a constellation we've seen already. Cassiopeia, which in mythology, she was the queen of Ethiopia, married to King Cepheids, whose outline looks like a house. And Cassiopeia made the mistake of bragging about her beauty to the nymphs of the sea. And if you know anything about the Greek way of thinking, the gods really didn't like it when humans showed too much pride. So the daughter of the nymphs, Neptune, the god of the sea, made a sea monster to make a wreck out of the land of Cassiopeia. So when I show you this sticky figure, we have some cute sticky figures. It doesn't look like a very imposing sea monster. It actually looks like a whale. And actually this monster, Cetus, is also, it comes from the same root as the word cetology, the study of whales, and it's sometimes referred to as being the whale constellation. And drawn like this, you can probably see how it looks whale-like. But for the sake of our story, we have to make it a pretty scary monster instead. Cetus, the sea monster, goes and makes a mess out of Ethiopia, the land of Cassiopeia. So Cassiopeia does what you do back in those days. She went to the oracle and said, how can I get rid of this monster? And the oracle said, good news, bad news. There is a way to get rid of this monster, but you have to do it by sacrificing your daughter Andromeda to the monster. So Andromeda's outline is beginning to appear. Here's her head, her shoulders, her waist, and her feet, one arm and another arm. So one of several constellation sticky figures in this story that's not going to win any beauty contest, although she was so ravishingly beautiful that Perseus would fall in love with her instantly. So there she is, shackled to a rock by the sea. The sea monster is getting closer. Things are looking pretty dire. Meanwhile, a second story is unfolding hundreds of miles away that's going to provide the solution to this rather difficult situation. And that involves Perseus. Perseus, a great hero, doesn't get a great heroic constellation, unlike that guy Orion. Here is Perseus. It's just a little squiggle of stars. It's often compared to a nightcap or a dunce's cap. So I think Perseus and Andromeda are having a competition to see who has the least appealing stick figure. So here he is. Look at me. I'm a hero. But he was a great hero. But he was a hero who had been sent on what appeared to be mission impossible. He was sent off to fight the dreaded Medusa, a monster that had snakes for hair and whose very gaze could turn you to stone. Now, fortunately, Perseus had friends literally in high places. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, gave him a bright, shiny shield and said, gaze at the reflection of Medusa in the shield. Do not look at her directly. That's a way to avoid being petrified, turned to stone, which, by the way, is what petrified means, turned to stone. And Mercury, the messenger god, was also there to give advice. Mercury gave Perseus a bag full of cool gadgets, including winged sandals like Mercury himself wore. So it allowed Perseus to fly out to fight the dreaded Medusa. So he goes flying off with his winged sandals and his new fancy shield. And he does encounter Medusa and follows the advice of Athena and looks upon her reflection in his shield. Here's an actual shield painted by the great Italian painter Caravaggio that depicts Medusa with her snake hair and her petrifying gaze. So Perseus was able to cut off the head of the Medusa, and some blood fell from the head and fell into the Mediterranean. And apparently that mix of salt water and blood of Medusa is the exact recipe you need to make a flying horse, because that was the origin of Pegasus. This is called the Great Square of Pegasus here. Although I should give you a caveat and tell you that Pegasus has only a walk-on role in this drama. Because remember, Perseus already had winged sandals. He could already fly. He was the only person who didn't need a flying horse. So actually, Pegasus goes off and has other adventures. Perseus goes winging home and flies over Ethiopia, and lo and behold, sees Cetus, the monster, getting closer and closer to Andromeda, the maiden. He falls instantly in love with Andromeda as he's flying over, and Perseus swoops down to save the day. Now, here is an actual vase from 2,500 years ago that portrays that exact moment. It's a very common story. You find it throughout these depictions. So here is Andromeda. And then here is Cepheids, who looks actually more like a boar here than a sea monster. And here is Perseus with his winged sandals that I mentioned a moment ago. And also, looky here, his bag full of cool gadgets is looking more packed than it was before, because Perseus has packed the dead head of Medusa into that sack. And even in death, the eyes of Medusa have the power to turn people to stone. So Perseus pulls out the dead head, has a monster look at it, and Cepheids turns into stone. And Perseus rescues Andromeda, and they live happily together for many, many years. So there are two different films called Clash of the Titans that retell this story. And the first was 1981 with Harry Hamlin as Perseus and Laurence Olivier as Zeus. The remake, though, in 2010 with Liam Neeson as Zeus made $750 million. There's a good chance that some of you out there have seen that version of the movie. So Sam Worthington, an Australian actor, plays Perseus. Both films call the monster the Kraken instead of Cepheids. Now, Hollywood sometimes does take stories and maybe gives new, sort of more impactful names to characters and changes the plot around to make it more dramatic. And so they call it the Kraken, and "Release the Kraken" is in fact the most famous line from both versions of the movie. I can't fault Hollywood, because Ovid, who wrote the story I told you, took earlier myths himself and tightened it up and changed it around. So Hollywood now is just doing what Ovid did in the 2nd century AD when he wrote the Metamorphosis, where the story comes from. So they're all there in the sky, these 6 constellations all joined together. They're not really bright, which is kind of interesting, that the stars of fall are fainter than the stars of winter, for example. But they do connect very nicely to each other and have lived in legend for over 2,500 years. Now, this part of the sky also is a very important part of the sky for discoveries. So there is a fuzzy patch in Andromeda that until 95 years ago was called the Andromeda Nebula. And there's a big debate about it. Was it a nebula, just a fuzzy little patch of gas in our own Milky Way, or could it be beyond the Milky Way? Well, on the very first day of 1925, so 95 years ago, Edwin Hubble, the astronomer, announced that he had found evidence that the Andromeda Nebula was no nebula. It was, in fact, a separate galaxy, and that instead of being maybe 1,000 light years away, it was over 2 million light years away. So it's called the day that the universe changed, the day that the announcement was made based on Hubble's research that we live in a universe that has more than just the Milky Way galaxy, that has the Andromeda, and as we also know now, probably 2 trillion other galaxies. So Andromeda Galaxy, as we call it now, is, we think, bigger than ours, although it may be roughly not much more massive. It has more stars, at least. It has probably 1 trillion stars compared to the 250 billion for our Milky Way. So here is Andromeda Galaxy. Here is the Milky Way. They're shaped very similarly. And although the universe, as you probably know, is generally flying apart thanks to the Big Bang, really massive items like galaxies are attracted to each other. And so in about 3.5 billion years, billion with a B, the Milky Way and the Andromeda galaxies are going to pass through each other and eventually turn into a single galaxy. So we often call it a collision, although the space between stars is so great that the stars will pass through each other. But this encounter will also generate a lot of heat and a lot of new star formation, which would be great for the Andromeda Galaxy because it hasn't had a lot of new star formation in the last billion years or so. And so they'll be the first pass through, but that won't be the end of it. They'll be drawn together again, and they'll go through this dance over millions of years, and will wind up eventually with a single larger galaxy where there were originally 2 separate galaxies. We're taking suggestions now for the name of this new galaxy. The winner so far seems to be the Milk-Dromeda Galaxy, a fusion of Andromeda and the Milky Way. And the universe has many examples of galaxies that are either going through this process already or that have emerged from this process as an oddly shaped oval or elliptical type galaxy. So that's our little coming attractions trailer, but no need to worry about it for about 3.5 billion years. So another thing that folks worried about was one of the stars in Perseus called Algol. The word Algol comes from the same Arabic root we get the word ghoul from, or monster. Now, it's not a really monstrous star, but this one star was thought to be the eye of Medusa winking at you out of Perseus's bag of full cool gadgets. Because this star does wink. It changes its brightness noticeably every 2.86 days. So here's Algol. Normally it's as bright as an average star in the Big Dipper, magnitude 2.1, but then it drops in magnitude by a factor of 3. It gets 3 times dimmer every 2.86 days, and then goes back up to normal brightness. And the whole process of its dimming takes about 10 hours. Well, it sounds kind of mysterious, although nowadays we know it's not mysterious at all. It's just 2 stars, one going around the other, and as the one star goes behind the foreground star, the combined brightness drops from 2.1 magnitude down to 3.4. But it's interesting that this winking effect of these stars in what is called Algol, the demon star, drove folks to think about it being this really scary, bad omen star, and to associate it with being the eye of the Medusa. There's another kind of star that does vary in brightness for very different reasons. They're called Cepheid variables. They're actually named for the constellation of Cepheus the king. And the archetypal Cepheid variable is called Delta Cephei. You see it here in the constellation of Cepheus. And these are also stars that vary in brightness, but for a completely different reason. And these stars have been a really important key for unlocking the mysteries of the deep universe. So a researcher at Harvard, around the year 1900, Henrietta Leavitt, had noticed there's a kind of star called a Cepheid variable that changed its brightness on a very regular pattern, much as Algol does. And Henrietta Leavitt's research led her to realize that the longer the cycle for these Cepheid variables, the brighter they were intrinsically. So with Cepheids, these are stars much bigger than the sun, 5 to 20 times as big. Coming to the end of their lives, they shrink down as they burn up their material, but that shrinking increases pressure in the core. So then the star swells up, and then it shrinks down again, and then there's more pressure and it swells up. And the cycle is very predictable, although it only lasts about 1 million years or so. And the stars that have long cycles were intrinsically really bright. I think the longest cycle is 127 days. The Cepheid variables that have short cycles, like say 2 days, are intrinsically very dim. Well, here's the important thing, and Henrietta Leavitt discovered this, and then Hubble built upon it, is that a star that has a long cycle is intrinsically bright. So what happened then with this information is that using the Mount Wilson Observatory in California in the 1920s, Edwin Hubble discovered a Cepheid variable in what was then called the Andromeda Nebula. This black and white picture actually shows you a plate that he used. So Sarah, if we go down here, it says 6 October 1923. You can maybe see 2 dashes here. You probably can't see, it's too faint. There's a star right where my arrow is. And so when Hubble discovered that, on the plate he wrote N for nova. He thought he had found a nova, a star that blows up once and then is never seen again. But then he crossed it out and wrote VAR exclamation point for variable. He had found a Cepheid variable in the Andromeda so-called nebula, and because the Cepheid variables allow us to figure out how far away this object was, because again, if you know how bright something is, you know how far away it is, he realized instantly this was not something in our galaxy. It was in fact a galaxy well beyond ours. Instead of being, as I was saying, 1,000 light years away, it is probably, as we know now, 2.5 million light years away. This was that proof that led Hubble to realize that it was no nebula. It was a galaxy, the Andromeda Galaxy. The discovery of the first galaxy announced in 1925 revolutionized our understanding of how vast the universe is. Most of the great discoveries we made about the universe have been discoveries that tell us it's even bigger. The universe is even bigger than we thought before. And a great example of teamwork across the decades, the research of Henrietta Leavitt at Harvard, Hubble having that knowledge, but also having access to this brand new observatory, the Wilson Observatory, was able to finalize that. And these are all, again, objects that are in that part of the sky, the Perseus and Andromeda part of the sky, that helped us to really revolutionize our knowledge of the scope of the cosmos. Now, we're looking towards the east again. I would be remiss without pointing out that we have two really spectacular objects tonight over there in the east. And the first of those two is the planet Mars. Mars is flaring up in brightness, and it's going to be rising here in the early evening and overhead all night. So check out Mars. It has a distinct orange color and is so bright right now that it actually, for the entire month of October, Mars is going to outshine Jupiter, which only happens in 1 month out of about 26. So why is Mars flaring up? Well, Mars is a little object. It's a small planet. Going back to last November, it was 230 million miles away and down near second magnitude. But as the Earth and Mars have gone around the sun over this last eventful year, month by month, the Earth has caught up with Mars. On the inner track, Earth moving more quickly. So every week, Mars gets a little brighter. Every week, Earth gets a little closer to Mars until we get to October, our current month that's just beginning, where Mars has gone from being 230 million miles away to being 40 million miles away. And so being so close right now, it is blazing away at minus 2.6 magnitude. It is outshining the planet Jupiter. So you can compare it if you want to. Look for this rising Mars and setting Jupiter tonight. And you can tell Mars is a little bit brighter. Okay, as if that weren't enough, we also have a full moon tonight. It's the full moon nearest to the first day of fall. And the full moon nearest to the first day of fall, whether it happens before the first day of fall or after, as in this case, is called the harvest moon. And so we're only 8 days after the beginning of fall, so this is the official moon known as the harvest moon. The harvest moon term is the most famous of all the terms that Farmer's Almanac applies to the full moons. Because, again, never underestimate the power of music. So the follies of 1908, long before Broadway was even the Broadway we'd recognize now, there was a song in that show called Shine On Harvest Moon that has lasted through the generations. I remember the great Northeast blackout in 1966. Our dad had all 9 of us Shanahan children singing this song on that night of the great blackout. And so this harvest moon is the most well-known of all the various moons. Now there's some debate, some claim that there's some Native American basis as well for the moon names. I've done a lot of research on this. Most of this naming seems, in my opinion, to go back directly to Farmer's Almanac and no further. But similar terms that we come to apply to the moons, and we come to know and love these moons. There's a harvest moon that you'll see tonight, October 1. And then on October 31, we'll have another full moon. So this full moon, you may be wondering, who are these guys? I'll get to them in a moment. So the full moon on Halloween will be the first Halloween full moon since 2001. So it's been 19 years since we've had a Halloween full moon. And if that's not enough, automatically, if you have a full moon on Halloween, it's also a blue moon, which is a term for the second full moon in the same month. It only happens once every 2 years. These guys are the composers Rodgers and Hart. Mainly, you may know Rodgers from Rodgers and Hammerstein. So with his later composing partner, he wrote Sound of Music, for example. But in their early years, Richard Rodgers paired with Larry Hart and wrote these really sarcastic, witty, amazing lyrics. And they had a really sarcastic song called Manhattan Melodrama. But they decided to go for the big pop market. So they wrote lyrics instead to that song that began, Blue Moon, You Left Me Standing Alone. They wrote perhaps the most gentle anodyne lyrics they've ever written in their lives, and it became one of their biggest hits. The song Blue Moon was a hit in the 30s, the 40s, and in 1960. The term blue moon means rare because these are rare events to have two moons that are full in 1 month. The other big debate is we don't really know the official origin of the term blue moon. My favorite explanation, which is so logical it makes me think it's probably not correct, is that it comes from the French word for double, which is double. That you can get pretty easily from double to saying bleu, as in blue moon. But it's one of those things that makes so much sense, and I'm thinking that's probably a little too convenient of an explanation. Anyway, 2 full moons in 1 month. The second full moon on Halloween will be the blue moon. And if that's not enough, it'll also be the smallest full moon of the year. So we had a whole show about the supermoon back in May. This will be the mini full moon. So as the moon goes around the Earth, the moon can be as close as about 224,000 miles. If you have a full moon then, it's a supermoon, a full moon, a little bigger and a little brighter than a normal full moon. But the moon doesn't quite do a circular path around Earth. And so if you have a full moon when the moon is at its most distant point from the Earth, it's 30,000 miles further away, about 252,000 miles and change. So if you have a full moon that happens when the moon is at its most distant point, the moon is a little smaller than a normal full moon, and it's called a mini moon. And that'll be the case on Halloween night. Now go ahead, try it for yourself on Halloween. Look up to that moon and tell yourself, try to figure out if it looks any smaller than normal. Because it will be a full moon happening when it's at its most distant point. It'll be a tiny bit smaller and a tiny bit dimmer. Now we're focusing primarily on the evening sky, but there's one thing I wanted to show you in the morning sky as well. So let's go through the night, because we do have the last of our 4 planets we wanted to point out. So the planet Venus is blazing away from now to the end of the year in the morning sky. And at -4 magnitude, no matter how hard Mars tries, Venus will always be the brightest planet. It's covered in these really shiny reflective clouds that bounce back light very easily and efficiently. So if you see a blazing dot in the morning sky, that'll be the planet Venus if it's kind of low over in the east. And every night from now to the end of December, it's going to get lower in the east, and you'll have less of the time before dawn to see it. But it'll be there until the end of the year. So this planet parade is not just for October. We're going to have Venus there to the end of the year in the morning sky. Mars is going to hang around all the way to the middle of 2021, and we'll lose Jupiter and Saturn, which are currently in the southwest in the evening sky, at the end of 2020. So a really good time for planet viewing. There are some times when you can't see any planets in the sky. So right now, every planet except for Mercury is going to be nicely on parade in terms of the ones that don't require a telescope to see them. Now, Venus was in the news recently. There is a recent discovery of phosphenes in the upper atmosphere, which is a molecule that is generally generated, at least here on Earth, by organic material. So it led to some speculation, could there actually be some kind of form of life in the upper cloud decks of Venus, which would be hilarious in some ways because Venus is such a horrible, no-good place on the surface that life is impossible. We haven't even thought about any chance of finding life on Venus until recently. So the atmosphere is really thick on Venus, so it traps heat like glass in the greenhouse. So on Venus, it's always around 870 Fahrenheit. And the pressure is incredibly dense, about 100 times as dense as the air on Earth. So in that incredibly hostile environment, life doesn't seem possible. But how odd would it be if it turns out there's some kind of, microscopic life in the clouds of Venus that are generating these phosphenes. So who knows? Never say never. It could be that this discovery is just a matter of a chemical process we don't understand yet. But it is interesting that Venus, we're not done learning about Venus. We also discovered recently that Venus has active volcanoes. Long theorized, but recent evidence from Venus Express indicates, yes, indeed, it is a volcanically active world. So with the crazy world of Venus, that's going to bring us to the end of the formal part of our program. So I wanted to thank you for joining us. As a recap, because it is really a couple of things here to wrap up. Please note that we do, in fact, post all of our shows on our Liberty Science Center in the House page. If you go to our homepage, go to LSC in the House, every one of the 25 shows that Andrew and Krista and I have done are available there. And this show will be there as well, if you wanted a reminder as Halloween approaches of the mini full moon coming up on Halloween. Also, we have 2 full moons on the 1st of the month. That is tonight. Check that out. And on the 31st is also a full moon. We got 4 planets, Jupiter and Saturn, beautiful and very clear in the early evening sky till about midnight. Mars rising around 9 and being overhead all night long, and Venus blazing in the morning sky. And we have that whole crew of constellations that generated 2 hit Hollywood movies. So it's a great time. And we have, at least here in our neck of the woods, beautiful weather to do the gazing with. So a couple of final things. If you want to support us, we do have a donate button. We are doing this as a gratis program for the public, but if you wanted to show your support, that would help us to keep these free programs going. And also, again, if you wanted to let us know in the chat the best time for us to do these programs, weekday morning, weekday afternoon, early evening, or weekends, that would help us to be able to get more of an informed decision of how to keep these programs going. So that will end our formal program. Thank you for joining us. I'll stay around for a few minutes and see if there's questions in the chat that we haven't been able to answer already. Thank you again for joining us. Oh, what a great question. Lori, what is sitting below Venus? Nice catch. I should have mentioned that. Venus is right now next to the star Regulus, which is the brightest star in Leo, the lion. And so Leo is interesting in that if you wanted to figure out like what a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th magnitude star is, Leo has one of each flavor in the kind of sickle shape that makes the head of a lion. And Regulus is the brightest of the stars in Leo, but it's also a really good example of a 1st magnitude star that's just barely in the club. It is shining brightly, and it's right next to the planet Venus tomorrow morning. So yeah, Victoria, we're talking a little bit life on Venus again. How ironic. What's really funny about the life on Venus thing is that no one gave any thought to this. We're not even planning rovers for Venus because that environment for our robot rovers is so hostile. You may have seen that Russian landing craft in our view of Venus. It lasted 2 hours in the early 80s before the pressure and the heat conked it out. So how amusing, perhaps, that we spend 100 years wondering about life on Mars if we turned around and discovered, oh, wait, there's not life on Mars, but apparently Venus might have a good chance of life. So, again, lots of extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, as Carl Sagan said. So I'm sure they're going to be working that issue of whether or not these phosphenes in the atmosphere of Venus indicate there's life there or not. But it's certainly an intriguing development that we weren't really expecting back in the day. So yeah, how often? Helen's wondering how often has there been a full moon on Halloween? So it happens roughly every 20 years or so. So 2001 specifically was the time of the last full moon, which was 19 years ago. So now here's a funny thing, at least it was amusing to me, growing up in Massachusetts. I thought it was absolutely delightful. The first time I went trick-or-treating, there was a full moon on Halloween. And I thought that was intentional. I thought there would always be a great full moon to light our way as we trick-or-treated in Worcester, Massachusetts. And then the next Halloween, there was no full moon because it's not a holiday pegged to the moon. There are some holidays that are pegged to the moon cycle, but those are dates that are clearly identifiable in that their dates vary in the course of the year, right? Like Easter, for example, or Passover. But so it's just a sheer coincidence that you get a full moon on Halloween, unfortunately. So the other thing I thought was that I thought that daylight saving time went off before Halloween like it used to do to allow that. I thought it was really cool that they were giving us nice dark skies on Halloween night to go trick-or-treating by. That was a total coincidence, and in fact, as you're probably aware, we've recently changed daylight saving time to end after Halloween to give us light as we're trick-or-treating. So it wasn't part of a great scheme to give young Mike Shanahan a full moon and a nice dark sky every time he went trick-or-treating. The time does change, by the way, the day after Halloween, November 1 this year. We're also at Liberty Science Center going to do a Halloween laser show on the weekend before Halloween and the Halloween weekend itself, October 24, 25, 31, and November 1. We're at 4 o'clock. We'll be doing our Boo, a Halloween laser show. A good chance to bring back our laser system. So if I look away, it's just because I am looking at the screen here to check out any of the questions here. And yeah, do you have a website to see presentations? So if you just go to LSC in the House, maybe we can post that in the chat as well. Liberty Science Center. If you go to Liberty Science Center's homepage, just go to LSC in the House, and it is great. Everything we've ever done is posted there. Jeremy, who's our wizard on this, gets everything posted. So literally there's 25 shows that we have done on astronomy, but also on other topics as well are posted there. And it's a really great resource. So this show will be there also. Usually within an hour of our presentations, they get posted on there. All right, so so I think we got to Yukiko's question that, yes, when will Venus appear? Venus is really quite, you have a nice window in the morning sky around 4 o'clock. You'll have about an hour to catch Venus in the sky. Venus will be there, but it's going to be lower and lower as it rises, and so it'll be a real effort at the end of December to still catch Venus, but technically it's going to still be in the sky until 2020 exits the stage. Wow, Jasmine is remembering that great blackout. Yeah, so it was 1965, and it was, back in those days we had more, we were more used to entertaining ourselves at home. Our family had a piano. We were all beginning to learn how to play musical instruments. I'm not sure how I'd handle a blackout now, but it was fun back in 1965. And I think 1963 was the actual full moon and Halloween. That's also look-upable. When I began getting into astronomy, researched that to see when a full moon was on Halloween when I was a kid. 1963, which as a melancholy overtone was, in other words, just 3 weeks before one of those moments that changed America, right? The loss of President Kennedy. But yeah, it was. I was pretty sure that the world was looking out for me and giving me this full moon and the early darkness to do my trick-or-treating by. Someone is asking about the best telescope to invest in. So we've had great luck with Orion telescopes. Andrew and Krista and I use them at work when we do our programs. You can get a good tabletop telescope for between $100 and $200 from Orion telescopes. And they're really good beginning telescopes. They're easy to use. The resolution is good. They're good enough to see the rings of Saturn. And so I'd recommend maybe getting one in the $100 range to test it out and see if you are going to make a lot of use of it. And then you can look at a more high-end model. But I think these $125 Orion telescopes that we use all the time at Liberty Science Center are as good as any for a beginning set. All right, so I think that is all the time we have. And so our show next week, we're going to be having a Q&A about the planets. And so that'll be at the regular time, 1 o'clock on the 8th of October. And we'll be doing the question about answering most often asked questions about the planets, taking advantage again of the planets. And then on the 15th, special time at 5 o'clock, I'm going to be doing a program on the night that panicked America. Orson Welles' radio broadcast of the War of the Worlds in 1938 made us really believe that Martians had landed in New Jersey and were taking over America from there. The last 3 shows of the month will all have kind of a Halloween theme. So that is it for now. Thank you for everyone for joining us and for making the comments in the chat and for your support for us. And we'll see you next week. Thank you again.